What if God had waited for Mary to be wed, for Herod to relent, for a legitimate birthing bed? What if God had waited until the powerful promoted peace and the politicians agreed? What if God had waited for a plan with no risk of failure, for a place that felt safe and secure? What if God had waited for the anxious to find rest, for the cynic to know hope, for the broken-hearted to be whole, for the wars to cease, for the violence to end, for the fears to pass, for the weapons to be banned? What if God had waited for the earth to heal, for the laws to change, for every life to matter the same, for the addict to be freed from shame, for the refugees to not be blamed? What if God had waited until all was calm, all was bright, for a future that might never come? What if God had waited? But God couldn't wait. God couldn't wait to be love known in flesh and bone, and neither should we.
That's a question we've been wrestling with over the past 4 weeks of Advent together. As we lit each one of the candles of hope, peace, love, and joy, we wondered for a minute, what would it have looked like if God had waited? And I know it seems like a silly question, but given just kind of the nature of problems that we experience in our own lives, and then globally and nationally and even locally here in Hawaii, the problems sometimes just seem so big. But what if God had waited for that right time? You know? It's a really interesting question to think about. As a parent, I know that one of the things that I've come to realize is that Christmas is coming, whether I'm ready or not, right? So I know that none of you are like me, and no one has anything else to do after this tonight. All of your gifts are either sent away via Amazon to Friends Mainland or wrapped and under a tree, and all of your Christmas cards are out, and your inbox is completely empty and ready to go, and you have no text messages or anything to respond to, right? Yeah. Oh, holy night, right? We can sing about peace and joy. Christmas is coming whether we like it or not. And I can't wake up in the morning and say to my kids, I'm sorry guys, we're going to take a rain check until I have a little bit more energy to do this unpacking of all of our gifts that we have together. It's here. I had a preaching professor that said, you will never get an extension on any sermon paper that you have because Sunday morning is coming for you, right? Sunday morning is coming. And if you don't show up prepared, you will have nothing to say, and it's coming whether you like it or not. So, although we talk about grace, he offered none to us. But that's okay. But seriously, though, think about it for a minute in regards to God and waiting. You know, we've been talking with our keiki and other times about this idea of the perfect nativity scene that we're all here in our Christmas best to celebrate. This idea that it's this iconic image with our star and our poinsettias. And we forget with the beauty and the bombastic brass and all the things that we have to celebrate that it all began in a barn. I learned something new as I was preparing for tonight, that it is a 90-mile journey from Nazareth to Bethlehem. That 90 miles they journeyed to go to this census that the Roman Empire had been putting on, And they were just starting into this time of Pax Romana, so there's peace throughout the land. But going to a census is not like the census it is today, where, the politicians can decide how many different people are in different areas, and they can equally allocate votes accordingly. Census back in that time was a brutal reminder of everyone who wasn't in power, who wasn't at the top 7%, of the rigid and overpowering taxation laws that they had throughout the empire, because the peace that they were experiencing throughout the world, as the scripture talked about, well, that comes at a cost. There's like an 80% tax rate at that time. And as they journey these 90 miles, and I can't even imagine trying to convince my spouse of doing that while she's 9 months pregnant, but journeying 90 miles, that's like the circumference of the island of Oahu, to go and find no space in any of the hotels, and then to have to deliver your baby and lay that baby in a manger, which is the fancy word for a food bowl, right? What if God had waited? But it's not just that. What if we wait? See, I like to have things perfectly packaged under my tree. I like to have everything ready and set. I like my planner to the max. And so I like to have all of my T's crossed and my I's dotted. And so there is never a good time for me to actually execute something. Because there's always the what if. Or I'm not enough. As a pastor, one of the things I struggle with is this tension that, people say, well, I can't share the good news of Jesus because I just don't know enough about the Bible. Or I don't have that great of a life to tell people that they should be like me. Or I don't whatever. And the list kind of goes on and on for why we might not want to share the good news. List also goes on and on about why we might continue to wait in our lives for the good news to be realized in our life. Well, now is maybe not a good time to free ourselves from the bondage of the work experience because, we have all of the bills we have to pay. Now is maybe not a good time to bring up the painful memories that I had with my brother or sister or spouse or parents. I'll wait next year when it's a little bit better. Or I'll wait until I have enough money in the bank, or I'll wait until I have enough time, or I'm done wrangling the kids, or I'm done paying the college tuition. I'm done doing all the things. I'll just continue to wait for that moment when I hear God kind of pulling me to act out these candles that we lit. Peace, hope, joy, and love. I wonder why we wait sometimes. And there's this phrase that I've been wrestling with a little bit over this week as I've been looking at the different translations of the text that we had. And it's the good news that comes to the shepherds. And the angels say to them, this is good news for all the people. And it's different than the Charlie Brown version. When they do the King James version, it says good news for all people. I was like, that's interesting. Why is it different? And I come to realize that the newer version, the version that I was reading from, we had some new texts that had been found at one point, and that the was an important difference in the translation. And it might mean not so much to you, but actually it means quite a bit because Jesus is good news to all, of course. But the angels were telling the shepherds that the good news of Christ was to the people, not to the powerful, not to the clergy, not to those who had their lives together, not to those who now was the right time that they could act out the gifts of love, of hope, of peace, of joy, because everything was perfectly packaged and ready to go. The gift was to all the people. The people. And I'm reminded that the Gospel of Luke, they don't include the Magi and the kings and all the fancy, frankincense and myrrh and all of those things. It was the humble shepherds that came to the Nativity that night. To the God King, Prince of Peace, born in a food bowl. And what that says to me a little bit is that the hope of God with us is also a hope of God for us. Because I know that there's probably one or two of you in the room that don't feel like you could ever embody God's love in the world. Because it's not the right time. But God is with us. With you. Empowering you to embody the gifts of love, of peace, of joy, and of hope. And that's the craziest thing about all, this Jesus celebration that we have tonight on Christmas Eve. Is that in the end, God charges us to be God's presence in the world. But the problems are too big, Pastor. I'm not a politician. I can't change the world. But you can do something to share the gift of Christ with the world. I'm going to gloat just a little bit on our office administrator, Stephanie. A few months back, we did a down-to-earth sermon series. We talked about how God calls us to care for the environment, and we decided to do a beach cleanup, which we talked about earlier. And she took that little moment, and she said, this is a massive problem. And Koina, can you play the picture there? And you all know, because you all walk on our beaches and go into our waters, and you see the microplastics that are all over the place. And I tell you what, we can't, we try to clean it, and then, it just goes out to the water, and it comes back in. And it feels like a defeating problem that we can never solve. But I was so inspired that a few months after our first project, she decided, I'm going to do something. And so, Koina, can you go to the next slide? And so now she starts packaging all these microplastics into these little letters. And then she sells them. And then she gives all the 10% of the proceeds go back to reusable, reducing plastic on the island. And it's a small thing, although it's turned into a big project, especially if you ask her husband, because, the whole room is taken over by all of these, because they're taking orders upon orders, because they're so amazing. But it was a small step, right? And sharing an act of kindness with a colleague, taking a step, a risk to embody Christ's love that we've come to celebrate in the world. We can all do that. Because we are all the people. Because my friends, if you are broken, if you don't feel like your life is in order, if you don't feel like it's a good time, there is good news for you, the people. Christ is with you. And Christ is going to move through you if you but allow yourself to be a vessel of these gifts that we're celebrating during the season. So let us go from this place on this eve as we lift our candles high. And we remember that each one of us, inside of us, has the gifts of Christ. Because Christ is with you, the people, to reveal God's love to the world. You might not think you believe enough, know enough, have enough time. God's love is with you. Go and reveal it to the world. Let that light shine in the darkness. I invite you to pray with me. And as the dancers make their way into place,